On August 10, 1945, just one day after the Soviet Union declared war on Japan, two young American Army officers sat in a Washington office with a National Geographic map and a deadline of 30 minutes. Their task: draw a ceasefire line across Korea. Neither of them had ever set foot on the peninsula. Neither spoke Korean. One of them later admitted they chose the 38th parallel simply because it looked roughly halfway down the map, and it kept Seoul in the American zone. What was meant to be a temporary military boundary lasted a week, then a year, then a decade. It has separated families, started a war, and shaped the lives of over 80 million people. This is how it happened. Part 1. A nation that was always one. Before we talk about division, you need to understand something important. Korea was unified for over 1,000 years. While Europe was constantly redrawing its borders through wars and revolutions, Korea remained remarkably stable. The Joseon dynasty, founded in 1392, ruled the entire peninsula for over 500 years. That's longer than the United States has existed. Korean identity, language, and culture were deeply unified. But by the late 1800s, Korea found itself trapped between three hungry empires: China, Russia, and Japan, each circling the peninsula for strategic advantage. Japan moved first. After defeating China in 1895 and Russia in 1905 in back-to-back wars, Japan had established itself as the dominant power in East Asia. In 1910, it formally annexed Korea, wiping it off the map as an independent nation. What followed was 35 years of brutal colonial rule. The Japanese banned the Korean language in schools. Korean names were forcibly replaced with Japanese ones. Hundreds of thousands of Koreans were conscripted into Japanese labor camps and military units. Korea's resources were extracted to fuel Japan's imperial ambitions across Asia. By 1945, Koreans had been waiting for independence for 3.5 decades. When Japan finally surrendered to the Allied powers in August 1945, the Korean people expected freedom. What they got instead was a new division they never asked for. Part 2. The line that changed everything. Here's something most people don't realise. The decision to divide Korea was made entirely without Korean input. As World War II ended, the United States and the Soviet Union were racing to fill the power vacuum left by Japan's collapse across Asia. The Soviets had just entered the Pacific War and were rapidly moving troops into northern Korea. Washington panicked. They needed a boundary to stop Soviet expansion before it consumed the entire peninsula. That's when Dean Rusk and Charles Bonesteel, the two officers with the map, drew the line at the 38th parallel. The Soviets agreed. The Americans were surprised they accepted it so easily. In hindsight, it gave the Soviets a defensible northern zone that included key industrial areas Japan had developed. The Americans kept Seoul and the more densely populated south. The division was supposed to be temporary, a short-term military arrangement to manage Japan's surrender and transition Korea to independence. A unified Korean government was the stated goal, but the Cold War had other plans. Part 3. Two Koreas are born. Within 3 years, the temporary line had hardened into a permanent border. In the north, the Soviets installed Kim Il-sung, a Korean guerrilla fighter who had spent years in the Soviet military, as leader. A communist state was rapidly constructed, modelled on the Soviet system, with land redistribution, state-controlled industry, and fierce ideological loyalty demanded from every citizen. In the south, the Americans backed Syngman Rhee, a Korean nationalist who had spent decades in exile lobbying for Korean independence. A capitalist, US-aligned government was established, though it was far from a perfect democracy in its early years. By 1948, two separate governments officially declared themselves the legitimate rulers of all Korea: the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north, the Republic of Korea in the south. Both governments wanted reunification, but on their own terms, and both were willing to fight for it. Part 4. The war that never officially ended. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel with 75,000 troops. Kim Il-sung had received quiet approval from Stalin and assurances from China. He believed South Korea would collapse quickly and the Americans wouldn't intervene in time. He was wrong on both counts. Within days, US President Truman committed American forces under the United Nations banner. General Douglas MacArthur led a dramatic counteroffensive, pushing North Korean forces all the way back to the Chinese border. Then China entered the war. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops poured across the border, pushing UN forces back south. The front line stabilized roughly near the original 38th parallel, almost exactly where the war had started. 3 years of fighting, millions of lives lost, entire cities reduced to rubble. And Korea ended up almost exactly where it began. In July 1953, an armistice was signed, a ceasefire, not a peace treaty. Technically, the Korean War has never ended. The two countries remain in a state of war to this day, separated by the demilitarized zone, a 4-kilometer wide strip of land. Part 5. Two countries, two completely different worlds. What happened next is one of the most dramatic economic and political divergences in modern history. South Korea in 1953 was one of the poorest countries on Earth, poorer than many African nations at the time. Today it is the 13th largest economy in the world. Companies like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG are global giants. Korean pop culture, music, film, food has conquered the world. South Korea went from rubble to global powerhouse in a single generation. North Korea took the opposite path. Under the Kim dynasty, first Kim Il-sung, then his son Kim Jong-il, now his grandson Kim Jong-un, the country sealed itself off from the world. A personality cult was built around the ruling family that borders on the religious. The economy collapsed. Famines killed hundreds of thousands in the 1990s. Today, North Korea is one of the most isolated and impoverished nations on Earth, while secretly developing nuclear weapons capable of reaching the United States. Same people, same peninsula, same language, completely different worlds, separated by a line drawn in 30 minutes. Why this still matters? There are still an estimated 100,000 families separated by the Korean Divide. People who have not seen siblings, parents, or children since the war. Occasional reunion programs allow a handful of elderly relatives to meet briefly, often for the last time, before returning to opposite sides of the border. Reunification remains an official goal of both governments. But the practical, political, and economic obstacles are enormous. And yet the hope persists, because underneath the politics, the nuclear standoffs, and the ideological warfare, Korea was one nation for over a millennium. The line at the 38th parallel was drawn in 30 minutes. Undoing it may take generations,